Alvin Louie is here with us from Courage is a Habit. We want to welcome him back here to Blaze TV radio and podcast. Alvin, it's good to have you with us. How you been?
Steve, I've been doing great. I've been busy, and it's good to see you. I love that article you wrote about how weak men's contributing to a lot of these problems. That was excellent.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. So the reason you're very busy is because we're essentially now in an all-out war, which I'm happy to see, because it's only like 30 years overdue, okay? But we're basically in an all-out war right now within American education. Or is that too much hyperbole in your view?
It is absolutely not. It is absolutely a war on families, and it's a war on innocence, on children. In K through 12, a lot of parents are finally seeing what's going on in education. But the problem is that they're seeing even average people that have never paid attention to a lick of politics are seeing it because, unfortunately, it's been saturated. It's been saturated at the school board level, the teacher level, and sadly and unfortunately at the school counselor and mental health level. And that's really kind of this new phase, this kind of almost last phase where they're getting into your children's minds and hearts and separating children from families. And last time I was here, we had just started exposing the American School Counselor Association, which we call ASCA. And your timing couldn't be better because this is the week that they call National School Counseling Week, or as I call it, Narcissist Insufferable People Week. And this is the week where they remind everybody how important they are. And the counselors, what they're doing is they're separating children from families by redefining two words, that's safe and abuse. They're redefining and expanding that to say, if you, the parents, don't succumb to the transgender ideology, the transgender cult, you now, the parents, are unsafe, you're abusive, and the school is the safe place. And now with the grants and money coming in from the federal department, every K through 12 are getting more school counselors, more social workers, and they're working with outside very radical agencies like Gleason, Outmain, those places like that to set the parents up to be abusive.
So when you were here before, you kind of blew my mind a little bit with your focus and fixation on school counselors and the role they played. I mean, I'm an ideologue, I'm logically driven. I'm focused so much on the curriculum and what's actually being taught. I don't even know if I other than, college preparatory discussions, I don't know that I even had a conversation with my guidance counselor in 4 years of high school. I don't think I could name a single one of the people that was my guidance counselor in high school. So just generationally, it's a different situation. But the more and more that we have dysfunction and broken homes, and kids are looking for anchors, they're looking for non-judgmental spaces, as they should. They're looking for places where they can be given empathy and heard unconditionally. It's clear in the last generation since I left school 30 years ago that this has become more of a battlefront because there is an emotional bond being forged in these places that in the past was largely relegated or formed or fashioned within the home.
That's right. And even then, there's always been, thank God, there's always been individual programs to help children who need help. And so what they do is this, and here's the simple formula. There have always been organic vulnerabilities. Organic vulnerabilities meaning things like a child's born into a drug-addicted home, they're abused or neglected, those kind of things. Those are organic vulnerability, drugs, violence. Mm-hmm. What the school counselors and these transgender ideologies, activists, transgender ideology activists, critical race theory pushers, what they did was they used people's kindness and heart for organic vulnerabilities to allow them to put in programs to smuggle in synthetic vulnerabilities. So what they do is they say, hey, look at all the kids who need help. And 99.9% of parents, their heart comes out, right? Of course they should. They go, yes, of course, these social emotional learning programs are great. These mental health issues are great. We're helping the kids who need help. And under that guise, they put in things like the pornography in schools because kids need to be seen. They bring in the transgender cult, the critical race theory. And all that divisiveness drags down academics, increases bad behavior, pits kids against each other, separates the parents, and then drives what we call synthetic vulnerabilities. So then now you're flooding the community and the school with kids with more vulnerabilities. And then next year, these mental midgets come back and say, oh, see, look at all these kids that need help. But they're the ones that create more synthetic vulnerabilities. They couch it as organic vulnerabilities to justify them being able to put more of this in schools, which is why the last 5 or 6 years, parents are going, what in the hell is going on?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like it's just a big flood of it. And in a sense, it is, because they spent the last 10 to 12, 15 years setting that foundation. Now it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. But organizations like ours and many others are starting to help parents figure that out and starting to stop the bleeding and then eventually run it out of schools.
I don't know if you realize this, Alvin, but what you just described is a biblical model of discipleship. Just with a completely different worldview framework. For example, you've described that they've moved beyond indoctrination, right? That was our focus, the curriculum, and what are they putting into their brains, and what are they teaching them, and are these things factually accurate? Are they true? What's postmodernism and subjectivism and all these other reductionism and all these other things? All right, but the original model of indoctrination was to feed you epistemologically empty information or vapid theory to give you permission to just act on your emotions or desires or, as you put it very eloquently a minute ago, vulnerabilities. What you just described is an opposite model, where I make the relational connection first. All right? We share vulnerabilities with one another. All right. We are doing life together. That's a discipleship model. That's like that's Christ and the apostles. Okay. That's mom and dad in the home. Okay. With the kids, they have now built an emotional bond of around those shared vulnerabilities with those children. And then they introduce the epistemological poison. But by that point in time, as a parent, your ability to argue against that is largely lost, because an emotional bond has been forged that you are now competing with on a much more molecular level than just an intellectual argument. Do you understand what I'm did I explain that well? You
explained that perfectly. You explained that absolutely perfectly, and that's exactly what they are doing. And then, like you said it perfectly, the parents, as it goes on, they have less and less of a chance to get them out. What you essentially described.
Let me interrupt for just a second. I think I found a simpler way to say what I was trying to say for the audience to get it. You're no longer competing with the schools intellectually. You're competing with them relationally. Relationally. That open marriage isn't going to work, basically, is what I'm trying to say. All right, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. Here's the best way I usually describe it for parents if I only have just 10 minutes with them. Imagine if I said, hey, Steve, I'm going to introduce a Buddhist class in K through 12. Okay. It's a 5th period Buddhist class. And you're like, okay, people are going to argue with me and say I should, I shouldn't. There's some books, some literature. But if I'm just teaching a Buddhist class, 5th period, parents can opt them out. Kids can decide not to take it as an elective. I'm not saying you got to take it before you graduate. Okay. Even if I said, no, you got to take it before you graduate, it's a 5th period Buddhist class when you're in junior in high school. Versus if I change the entire K through 12 to a Buddhist temple.
Yeah.
When you walk into a Buddhist temple, you're not learning about Buddhism. You're learning how to live and think.
Yes,
and make
you're being discipled.
Like,
yes. You've gone from being indoctrinated to being you're discipled now. You own this now. Like we can deprogram bad indoctrination. You can deprogram that. Yes. Okay. It's not easy, but it can be done. Here, you're talking about a cultic form of groupthink. Right. You're talking about a form of discipleship, and that is not as easy to untangle people from once the emotional bond is forged. Once this is where I go to get meaning and empathy and unconditional love, or at least faux versions of those things. And if you take those things away from me, who will love me? Who will care about me, right? You're not competing with them intellectually anymore. You're competing with them relationally now.
That's why they tell kids today, if your parents don't accept you, we're your family now.
Exactly.
That's literally signs that they have out in schools. And these school counselors and social workers, they don't even hide it anymore. They basically say most parents they don't know how to raise their kids. They're abusive. They don't accept their kids. And so we do it. This is why when you hear words like inclusion, we support all students. They don't mean they support all students. They mean that we want to get all students. And that's why you hear all these things like, I need to be seen. I need to be heard. I need to be represented. Those are these language contamination that puts parents to sleep because they don't know that's what it actually means. So that's why when they lose their kids, when their kids come home and say, I'm a different pronoun or name, parents are like, where is this coming from?
Right.
They were fine in the 4th grade, but in the 5th, all of a sudden they're a different, different sex, a different pronoun. No, you didn't lose them in the 4th to 5th grade. You lost them from 1st grade on. You just didn't know it because they laid that foundation early on.
That's why, hey, once the relationship's established, we might as well consummate the relationship. So we see soaring sexual relationships with educators and their students, for example. That's why to them, they're not pedo groomers. Well, in any family relationship, we have to talk birds and the bees, right? We have to talk about, human sexuality and carrying on the species. Right. And this is a rival discipleship model. It's not just a center of indoctrination anymore. That's what I think you're describing.
That's absolutely right. And the one thing I want that, we always try to give parents some takeaways and some to-dos. Here's the one question I want parents to form a habit of asking themselves. Every time a school counselor or teacher or school board member or whoever tells you we're just doing X, it's just about inclusion, empathy, responsible decision-making, whatever they're going to tell you. Here, instead of saying, oh, that's good, because we do that at home too. That's what 99% of parents will say. That's why they use those words. Instead, I want your listeners to train themselves to ask them this first question instead. Through whose lens is being taught that? Through whose lens is that virtue or that trait being taught? Because what the mistake that we all make in a civilized good society is that we assign positive traits to, or assign positive connotations to certain traits. I'll give you an example. For like a goal setting, they haven't taken over the word goal setting yet, so I'm going to use that. Goal setting is good, short-term, mid-term, long-term goals, right? We teach our kids that, we do that. But when we capture, let's say, arrest a serial killer, okay? We don't say, hey, he's good at goal setting. But he did. He had goals. Right. He met them. Sometimes he exceeded them. Yeah. But we don't say that because we don't assign that connotation. Right. So it's the same thing with schools. Yeah. When they say empathy, they don't mean the same thing you and I mean, Steve, or any of your listeners. They mean that, hey, if you're a girl and you get a man in a locker room or a bathroom and you feel that gut reaction that all women should have, you need to have empathy. So it's through whose lens is that being taught? And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the teachers and coaches and principals largely reflected the same values as their community. Not so today. So every time they tell you it's just about X, your question is, through whose lens is it through? Because today it's mostly through a lens of a critical race theorist or a transgender activist.
What's the plumb line that we're seeing these things through, in other words? Great stuff, Alvin. Where can people learn more about your organization and get some applicable tools as well that'll help them as parents?
CourageIsAHabit.org or any of our social media at CourageHabit. But at CourageIsAHabit.org, there's going to be a tab called School Counselors. If you click on that tab, you will see a host of resources and exposés that we've exposed the American School Counselor Association. But equally as important, at the end of each of those documents, each of those resources is a opt-out form. And I want every parent to use it. I want you to take it in on Monday, and I want you to use it. And I want you to pressure your school to make sure they honor your parental rights. Don't let them tell you that they can't honor it. Sometimes they'll lie to you, depending on your school district and your school board. But I want you to do that, to put that in, to say my child is not to be have any formal or informal meetings with any mental health professional, whether it's on staff or contracted. Then in that same tab, there's something we put out. It was our last release of 2022 called Stranger Danger. And it gives you 5 strategies on how to teach your child to protect themselves. And every family can modify it depending on the age of the child and then their values as well. And of course, we're a nonprofit. Any support you give us, it goes right back into the fight. We know that the 99% of parents don't have 40 hours to dig through this. These programs are meant to be confusing. It's meant to be complicated. And so we try to distill it down so that You don't have to go through 40 hours every week looking through this. We give you just enough for you to understand so that you can fight for your children, because that's the most important.
Amen. CourageIsAHabit.org is where you want to go. CourageIsAHabit.org. Good to see you again, Alvin. Thank you.
Good to see you, Steve. Thank you.
Take care.